Papa, look, oxen. Those are the words of a young girl. The year was 1879. The place, a newly discovered cave in northern Spain, a place to become known as the Caves of Altamira. While her dad poked around on the cave floor, little Maria went exploring with her lantern. She gets the credit for the first discovery of ancient prehistoric cave paintings. They weren't oxen, they were bison. They were later tested and determined to be about 35,000 years old. They're one of the earliest examples of man's ability to communicate with graphic images. How important is art in our lives? This is a silly question. I mean, art is everything in our lives. I could make the statement that without art, we would just be animals in the forest looking for food. You might not agree, but there's some truth to that. Think of this. If you found yourself in urgent need someday, this piece of art might make a big difference. It's everywhere. I'm going to jump ahead from the cave art to a town not very far from those caves. Another town in northern Spain, Guernica. April 1937, in an experiment, a military experiment to determine what would it take to destroy a city with just aerial bombing. Nazi, German, and Italian bombers came over the city and dropped bombs for 3 hours. They destroyed the city. It was a huge success. They killed hundreds of civilians, many women and children. It also inspired Pablo Picasso. Picasso's mural, at about 11 feet tall and 25 feet wide, is recognized around the world as one of the most powerful anti-war paintings ever done. My wife and I had the emotional experience of viewing this painting quite a few years ago in Madrid. It left a lasting impression. So much so that a couple of years ago, we visited the town of Guernica. We visited the Peace Museum, another emotional experience. Art can do just what this survivor asked us. It can help us remember. It can help us prevent us from doing the same things again and again. What's Colin Powell got to do with it? In 2003, Secretary Powell gave a speech at the entrance to the UN Security Council, justifying the invasion of Iraq. On the wall behind him was a large tapestry reproduction of Guernica. Not a very good backdrop for a speech justifying war. So it was covered with a giant blue cloth. Picasso's work became even more powerful because it had to be covered up. I don't completely agree with Mr. Picasso here. I don't think art needs to agitate. Not a bad thing if it does. But I think art should create some kind of emotional response. It doesn't have to agitate. An example would be the work of local renowned artist Phyllis Schaefer. Phyllis's work does not agitate. Quite the contrary. It's peaceful, it's tranquil, it puts a smile on your face. But for me, looking at it, it also gives me a sense of, this is a pretty nice place we live in. We should protect it. Artists have always tackled tough subjects: poverty, hunger. This simple charcoal sketch made a difference back in the 1920s. I did this piece based on the song One Meatball. It's a song about a man down on his luck with little money in his pocket. He walks into a restaurant, looks at the menu. The only thing he can afford is one meatball. When he asks the waiter, could I please have some bread? The waiter belittles the man and yells across the dining room, he gets no bread with one meatball. There's a lot of messages in that song. I did include the meatball in my sculpture. The peace sign, one of the most recognized symbols all over the world. It's been around since the 50s. It's been used countless times in different ways by artists. Has it ever prevented a war? Probably not. Has it ever ended a war sooner? Maybe it's had some effect. But I'd like to think it's at least increased social consciousness about the effects of war and made us think a little more about going to war. I did this piece as a tribute to John Lennon. It's a lot of peace signs. For my generation, the Vietnam War was a sad chapter in our country's history. Young people such as myself at that time just did not understand what we were doing, why we were there. Kids went to the streets and protested. Artists went to their easels and made protest art. This is just a small sample. Did it have any effect? Who knows? I think it had some effect. But much more than the protest art was the work of photojournalists. Vietnam was the first televised war. And when images like this came into America's living rooms, the level of support eroded pretty quickly. These photojournalists made a difference, and indirectly they saved lives. The Iraq War, there was some protest. This is just a simple piece of graffiti on the side of a gas station, but it's powerful nevertheless. I listen to a lot of music in my shop as I do my woodworking. These lyrics really caught my attention. I want to know who the men in the shadows are. I want to hear somebody asking them why. And if you look closely, there's chaos at the bottom of the vessel, and there's eyes peering out the castle windows. My wife and I also hiked a portion of the Camino in northern Spain, a trail sometimes referred to as the Way. While we were there, we visited a very, very old ancient monastery. In the front of the church was this sculpture, probably from the 1500s. It was really disturbing to see. None of us in our group thought it belonged in a church, but there it was. It was a powerful reminder of that never-ending conflict between the religions of the world. I'm going to go on to something not quite so depressing. Eco-art, art that brings attention to environmental issues. This artist does a lot of this kind of stuff. He goes to city dumps and collects materials. He enlists the help of local young people with the constructions, and they build these kind of sculptures. He leaves a lasting impression. If nothing else, he teaches people that not all trash belongs in the dump. These artists wanted to make a point at a UN climate change summit. They collected 12 giant chunks of free-floating ice off the coast of Greenland, brought them to Paris, arranged them in a circle like a clock so all the attendees could watch the melting, trying to make a point. One of them had this quote, turning thinking into doing. I love the sentiment. This sculpture speaks for itself. The saddest thing about this, though, is the date. What have we done since 2011? It's kind of sad. One of my favorite pieces, and I suppose partially because my son was one of the major makers, we all loved whales and saving whales, and this was at Burning Man, but it's also now in downtown Reno if you have a chance to see it. I grew up in a large New England home in northern New Hampshire. 5 brothers and sisters. My dad was always looking for a way to save money. Turning off the lights was pretty important in our family. You never left a room without turning off the lights. Some other eco pieces of mine. Rocky Road Ahead has a pretty clear message. Handle with care is intentionally a very fragile piece. Most people are familiar with the work of Norman Rockwell. He did a lot of these kind of paintings, but you might not be familiar with this painting, which he did to publicize the murder of 3 civil rights activists. This is my very latest piece. I only finished this about a week ago. It's got dark wood on one side, light wood on the other, a mix in the middle. An older piece with the same kind of theme, the strength of a square knot with dark and light wood. Everybody's seen this painting, it's very famous, but you might not be as familiar with this photograph. Gordon Parks was a very talented photographer, activist, and later on, a movie maker. He introduced the black action hero to Hollywood. He opened doors for other black artists. He led the way for people like Spike Lee. Gordon Parks made a difference. I was so happy with the election of Obama first time around, and I thought I've got to make a piece. Square peg and round hole, it is possible. The strength of man working together. Equality has 1,215 pieces of wood, the date Magna Carta was written. Broken Spirits is a tribute to the first Americans. It also decorates the cover of a book I wrote about 16 years ago. This piece of graffiti that features the word hope, a year ago or so in England, was voted England's #1 favorite piece of art. Hope is a very powerful thing. When we lose hope, we're in big trouble. Graffiti also played a huge role in the Arab Spring. Artists hit the streets with their spray cans and made images like this and others, many others. They inspired the population. Indirectly, they improved the lives of millions of people. Perhaps nowhere was graffiti a bigger thing or more prolific than on the Berlin Wall. Artists went from end to end, covered that wall from top to bottom with images after images. In some way, they may have at least put a crack in the wall towards its demise. What do I mean by that? Well, here's an example. In 2008, in China, there was a series of earthquakes. They tumbled some shoddy concrete construction of some schools. Over 9,000 Chinese students, young students, were killed. The Chinese government tried to cover it up, the number of deaths. So this artist has taken 9,000 school-type backpacks and made this, call it a billboard. The Chinese symbols spell out a quote from one of the mothers. She lived a very happy life until she was 7. Doesn't that get you? Ansel Adams made some great photos, but he also helped save special places. Harper Lee didn't write that book just for the money. She had a message to share. Aretha, she made a few dollars, but she gave a voice to millions of the voiceless. I was so turned off by events on the southern border. Seeing children taken away from their mothers and literally put in cages, I had to do something. This was the result of my feelings. Did this a couple of years ago for Burning Man, largest project I've done in wood turning. My son was a big help with the steel tripod. 31,000 pieces of wood, really just to make a simple message of peace, love, and happiness. Something very few people are going to argue against. We live in one of the most beautiful places on earth. Tahoe is a national treasure. Our lifestyle here is further enhanced by public art. I love public art. I love to see the murals and the sculptures around town. I wish we had more of it. Big fan of public art. I've got 3 ornaments here that are down by the Tahoe Mountain Lab along the side of Highway 50. Call it a contribution to public art in town. My biggest wood turning, actually biggest turning because it's all steel, It is circular. It is segmented. It's 1 million pounds of welded steel. It's a sample of architectural art, and I did design and direct the building of this, and it provides that fairest picture the world affords. Art can do so many things. It can help us fantasize about the future, and it can put tears in your eyes. Movies, probably our most powerful art form, movies and television. They do a lot more than just entertain. They educate us, they shape our opinions and viewpoints on so many different subjects. What's the bottom line? Yeah, art makes a difference, but we can all make a difference. We can all do little things, little acts of kindness to improve what's called the human condition. I'm just one guy. I happen to have a wood shop with some woodworking tools, trying to make that tiny difference. The theme of this event is building bridges. I'd like to think we can all contribute a nail, maybe a teaspoon of glue, towards the construction of those bridges. Thank you.